So it seems like everything isn't going too well for the Clippers, as there has been several reports that Paul George and the Clippers have not been on the same page, and unfortunately, due to the disagreement, there could be a premature conclusion to an era of Clipper basketball that has been certainly underwhelming. And boy, if that happens, we gonna have a lot to talk about. Brian Windhorst recently has reported that the Clippers have not been willing to meet Paul George's prices. He remains unsigned. You can't just look at teams with salary cap space. If Paul George changes teams, it's very likely that he's going to be in a situation where he opts into his contract and potentially requests a trade. In another report, more specifically aligned with a potential suitor out in Philadelphia, states the Clippers are unwilling to offer Paul George more than they gave Kawhi Leonard, a 3-year, $152 million contract extension. The Sixers, however, could be willing to offer Paul George a full-scale max contract, making $212 million over the course of 4 years. The fact that the Clippers are unwilling to just throw the max contract at him really does mean that there could be some potential concerns about the future for the Clippers. In my humble opinion, this doesn't make any sense if you're Los Angeles. If anything, Paul George has been the catalyst and one of the more consistent pieces that has shown up day in and day out, to the tune in which we cannot forget he forced his way out of a situation in OKC to help bridge a relationship with he and Kawhi Leonard to Los Angeles to make this new era of Clipper basketball that was supposed to be hyper successful. So the fact that we're at this stage of this relationship and you're unwilling to give him one more deal certainly leaves a lot of people hesitant. However, when you look at it from the Clippers side, honestly, it makes a lot of sense. Due to new rules in the CBA that really limits what certain teams are able to do once they're over the second tax apron, there are several teams that have been constantly looking and seeking for financial flexibility, especially when certain players are coming off of the books. Not being able to sustain that flexibility certainly hurts you in the long run, especially because you have no idea what you're going to look like at that stage in your franchise history. And so making sure that Paul George's contract expires at the same time that Kawhi Leonard's expires as well definitely keeps that flexibility that you would need, especially if you are going to look at a rebuild, which I do at this point believe that that is the inevitable. Now, what exactly does this mean for PG and the Clippers? Honestly, this is going to be a very, very tough decision. PG is actually coming off of one of the more respectable and best seasons he's had as a Clipper, as he finished the season averaging around 22 to 23 points, 5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, a steal and a half on shooting splits of 47, 41, and 91% from the charity stripe. Defensively, not the same player that he once was, but the level of accuracy and the fluidity he was running with offensively is something that we haven't seen in quite some time. But more importantly, as a wise man once said, the best ability is availability, and PG finishing this season playing 74 games is the most that he has logged in since he's been in Oklahoma City Thunder, which has been a major piece to what has gone wrong with the Clippers over the past several years. Yes, Kawhi Leonard and his injuries has certainly held them back, but Paul George's inability to play deep postseason runs or even just play a lot of regular season games has also held this team back from achieving a certain level of success as well. And so to see PG playing 74 games this year is not only great to see for, the Clippers and his career, but more specifically to this video, it definitely raises his value to the rest of the NBA, to any team that may have had any concerns about his ability moving forward to just play enough games to be impactful. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say that Paul George just turned 34 years old, so signing him to a 4-year deal is a pretty steep commitment. Heck, this might be the last contract that Paul George may ever receive. So because of that, when talking about the type of deal that PG is looking to receive, there certainly has to be a level of desperation for whatever organization that is willing to add him. More than likely, you're going to get a worse version of himself as the years progress, and God knows who he's going to look like by the end of this contract. Now, there are a couple of teams out there that are pretty desperate, and I would actually have argued that the Clippers should have been one of them. This is a team that is going into a new arena trying to commit and sell the idea to their fans that they are still a title contending team, despite the fact that they haven't won a championship yet, nor even made the finals, and only made the Western Conference Finals one time. And not being able to bring Paul George along for that ride is certainly a much, and I do mean a much harder sell to really anyone. But it is something that I do believe is necessary, especially because this team doesn't really have that much flexibility, regardless if he's on the team or not. As it stands now, PG isn't the only player on the roster that they have to resign. James Harden is another player that they have to prioritize as well and get that deal done as soon as possible. But regardless, with Paul George's player options still on the books, even when Harden is a complete free agent, they still have have already committed $174 million to this roster. $52 million of that is going to Kawhi Leonard next year, $19 million is going to Norman Powell, and $11 to nearly $12 million is going to PJ Tucker, Zubac, and Terrence Mann each. So again, this is a team that doesn't have that much wiggle room at all. Even if Paul George isn't on the roster, let's just say he opts out, this team still has $120-some million committed to this team, and they're still going to sign James Harden to the roster as well, which his amount of money is probably going to scale somewhere between $38 to $40 million on a year-to-year basis, which effectively would put them right back in the ballpark of around 170 anyway. Just last year, they've already committed $200 million to the roster, and if they decide to keep everyone intact, that is a payroll that they will carry over not only next year, but the year after that and a year after that, which then brings into several different conversations about luxury tax bill, then passing the second tax apron, and when you get to that point, you really have to start asking yourself, is it all worth it? And even if you think it is, how much longer are we going to go with this whole charade of this basically prolonging the inevitable? As we all know, the names that Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and Russell Westbrook may hold throughout NBA history, at this stage in their careers, they are certainly a shell of themselves, and again, as time continues to progress, they're going to get worse. The bigger concern here is Kawhi Leonard, who this season once more was not able to finish another postseason run. And keep in mind, this certainly was supposed to be the year in which he should have been able to do so. He was available for 68 games this season, the most that he's played since 2017, which is crazy. The Clippers shut him down in the beginning of April, basically kept him sidelined for 3 weeks straight, and even when the playoffs began, he still wasn't ready and only played 2 games in a first round matchup against the Dallas Mavericks. So if you're telling me that you can get a 3-week break and you're still not available and prepared to play 1 round of basketball, that is something that is certainly concerning. This is a team that will eventually have to come to the conclusion that it's not really working out. And I do believe that is also something that Paul George is starting to acknowledge as well, as there have been several quotes on his podcast where he has acknowledged that he's not just trying to win a championship, but he's also trying to find the right fit for him as well. And that kind of brings us to where we are now, where we get to play Where Does PG Go? Now, to be honest, trying to find a team for Paul George, it was slim pickings. Don't get me wrong. 6'9", great three-point shooter, shot creator, offensive repertoire is much deeper than I think a lot of people expect, but moreover, a great plug-and-play guy that can give you really great production on both sides of the floor. However, I also had to be very realistic. 34 years old, potentially seeking a 4-year deal, and there has been very clear signs of regression and lack of availability. Sure, he just came off the best year I've seen out of him in quite some time, but even that, I don't believe that it would justify any team to just throw out a 4-year contract at a 34-year-old. Unless you're really desperate or you have the ability to maximize what PG is able to bring to your team without losing so much of your identity in the process of trying to acquire him. Sacramento Kings, that I actually believe are a sneaky good suitor for him. New Orleans Pelicans, I saw a lot of people talking about the Dallas Mavericks. Heck, even the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Orlando Magic would also be really great fits for PG. I don't think any of those teams are either A, so desperate, or B, could maximize who Paul George is as a player immediately to make sure that they get the most out of a 4-year deal that they're going to hand to a 34-year-old. Outside of maybe the Cavs, because I know they want to convince Donovan Mitchell to stay long-term, and I could see a deal getting done with Jared Allen and Darius Garland in the conversation that would also benefit the Clippers pretty immensely. However, I also believe losing that much for the Cavs could lose a lot of their identity, but nevertheless, I think that is on the table as well. But regardless, I did find 2 teams that I do believe give very great options without losing too much of their identity, who are also in a situation where they can maximize Paul George immediately, so you're not regretting handing $40 million to a 38-year-old at the end of his contract. The first team are the Philadelphia 76ers. Philly, an organization that reeks of desperation because they know that it's also just a matter of time before Joel Embiid starts demanding trades. And when that happens, it's going to be tough. They don't have to concern themselves with any type of sign-in trade or get another team to kind of bring this player over because they've flushed out their entire payroll. The only player that is making a substantial amount of money that is on the books right now is Joel Embiid, and that's it. Of course, they're going to sign Tyrese Maxey to a max contract, but before they do that, they're going to hit the free agency running very, very soon. And not only from a financial standpoint, just from a fit standpoint, it also just makes a lot of sense. A trio of Maxey, Embiid, and PG makes a lot of sense. You have your wing depth that you have been lacking for quite some time in Philly, especially after you lost Jimmy Butler. Maxey can continue to improve with his on-ball reps as Paul George can move off ball, and both of those perimeter players really complement Joel Embiid and what he's trying to do as well. well, while also alleviating a lot of that stress that has been on Embiid over the past 2 to 3 years with the slow but very evident regression of talent that has been around him. And because of that, I actually believe that PG going to Philly makes the most sense. Easy transaction, and it immediately puts you in a conference to where you only really have to compete with the Boston Celtics. And I could very well see this Sixers team competing very well against Boston if this trio is available and healthy. But of course, that kind of brings up one of the biggest concerns that you have for the Sixers, and that is Joel Embiid. Paul George just spent the better part of his prime playing alongside another star that has never been available to make a deep postseason run. And for him to go from Kawhi to Embiid, I don't really know, man. That's going to be a really, really tough sell. I don't know, right? The commitment that you would have to make to play alongside Joel Embiid is a pretty steep one. I think that's pretty crazy. However, there's another big problem that I think a lot of people have been alluding to, and that is the Daryl Morey issue. There's been a quote floating around from Paul George on his podcast about how certain execs have built a reputation that hasn't bowled over too well with certain players in the NBA. And the reason why this is very relevant is because the one star that would have a lot to say about an executive that he used to work for would be James Harden, with his relationship and how it just completely went to hell with Daryl Morey. And so if that doesn't work, I honestly believe the only other situation that just makes the most sense has to be the New York Knicks. Knicks this year were amazing, sensational. Jalen Brunson had the city on fire, finished with 50 wins, second seed in the Eastern Conference, and looked like they were poised in position to make a deep postseason run. Moreover, a lot of the players that played really well in this postseason are not only under contract, but they're not making that much money at all. Josh Hart this upcoming season only under contract for $18 million. Dante DiVincenzo next season only making $11.4 million, and what they did in the postseason was amazing. And even though, yes, there is a conversation about what the Knicks are willing to pay OG Anunoby, and my goodness, the rumors surrounding his name, big bucks. However, if you're the Knicks, you don't have to worry about paying a role player that type of money if you can seek an upgrade to a star caliber player at the exact same position, which would be Paul George. And also, when it comes to the Clippers, if you are going to lose Paul George, you certainly would want his replacement to be someone who's defensive oriented, a little bit younger, more athletic, and sure, it's not going to be the same offensive ceiling, but complements what the rest of the roster looks like. Having one of the best corner three-point shooters in the NBA certainly wouldn't hurt whatsoever. You have a role player who plays his role, does a little bit more dirty work than Paul George, and also comes at a much more, and I do mean much more palatable price, and probably is more willing to accept a 3-year deal instead of trying to find a 4-year one. And when it comes to the Knicks, giving Brunson another offensive scoring option that he desperately needed, because in his playoff run, he looked like 0-1 Iverson out there trying to create offense for literally everyone. But giving him someone else, especially in half-court settings, especially someone who is a very respectable three-point shooter as well, will continue to keep the floor open and keep this team very flexible in what they can do in terms of the rest of the roster construction as well, while keeping very, very pivotal and important pieces to what this team was able to do all throughout this last postseason run. That was very impressive. And in my honest opinion, I actually believe that this is the best opportunity for Paul George. He keeps the identity of being a second option, gets to flourish in a defensive role where he's not held to the same responsibility that he had out with the Clippers, especially when Kawhi Leonard wasn't available. Plays on a team where you have a lot more dirty work guys who run up and down the floor, who are willing to give a little bit more athletic oomph that the Clippers have been lacking and that Paul George has been slowly regressing in. And moreover, what he provides to this team can really put the Knicks over the top and start competing with some of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. But regardless of what happens, it seems like PG going to another team is basically inevitable. Unless the Clippers are willing to give him the 4-year deal that he's looking for, I have a hard time believing that he's going to stay with the Clippers. And it does mean that there's going to be a conclusion to an era of basketball that has not resulted in a championship, not resulted in a finals appearance, not even consistently making deep postseason runs. And man, there will be conversations that will be had, because I do believe that means that the Kawhi and PG era with the Clippers, by far some of the most disappointing years I've ever seen in my entire life watching basketball. That's just my thoughts. Please let me know yours in the comment section below. Hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.